Let me extend a very warm greeting to all of you, especially to the three panelists. Today's, if I'm not mistaken, already 32nd European Academic Forum, which is organized within the framework of the Jean Monnet Chair of the New University, dedicated to pluralism in the European Union. One of the say the most important legs, but one of the usual legs of this research project that we are conducting here at the New University, which is supported by the European Commission, has been also a reflection of the future of the so-called Western Balkans on its way to the European Union. The Western Balkans range construction in nominal terms. Mostly, as we know, it's about the countries of the former Yugoslavia. And I have invited today three speakers from this part of our neighborhood, namely Dr. Tatjana Papić, who is a professor of public international law and international human rights law at the Union University Belgrade. Then Dr. Damir Banović, who's associate professor at the University of Faculty of Law from the Department of Theory of State and Law. And last but not least, Dr. Denis Prešova, associate professor of constitutional law at the Sirius University in Skopje, Faculty of Law, Justinianus. So we have, as it were, three academic representatives of Herzegovina, Serbia, and Macedonia, respectively, and we will discuss with them the past, present, and the future of their countries on their way to the European Union. We know these days that the world is getting increasingly complicated. Some would even say that the world is getting increasingly mad. The Western Balkans remains as one of the regions which is still in the waiting room to accede to the European Union. The region has had its ups and downs. Sometimes the events have been more optimistic, at time less optimistic, but especially in the past few weeks, I've seen quite a strong pro-democratic push in Serbia. We have a very strong student movement, which has inspired some similarities here in Slovenia, towards democratization, towards revitalization of the rule of democracy, which are the most cherished values of the European Union. So we have decided today to pick and choose on three questions relating to the region. The questions will be posed by me, but I would also like to invite you, the audience, as you're following our debate, into our chat room and posit your questions or maybe even comments regarding the discussion that you will be following. We are planning to do around 3 rounds between myself and the three speakers, and then open discussion for any further comments or questions that will be in the chat room, as I already indicated. So without further ado, I suggest we start with Tatjana. I already hinted a little bit at the recent developments in Serbia. So I invite you to reflect with us on the current state of affairs in Serbia, especially regarding its progress towards the criteria of full EU membership. So how do the things currently stand?
Okay. First, thanks, Matej, for this kind invitation. I'm very glad to be a part of this episode of the European Academic Forum. As to your question, on one hand, if one wants to use this bureaucratic language of the EU, one can find in progress reports. One can say that the state of affairs is a mix of improvements related to some economic progress and factors, and poor and moderate improvements when it comes to political and institutional reform. But if you want to say how things really stand, I would say that the biggest challenge to the path of Serbia to the EU is the very reason for the ongoing protests on the streets of not just Belgrade, but all over Serbia. And that reason is the lack of the rule of law. Just to remind the audience, these protests that are primarily led by students, while other groups, such as teachers, farmers, actors, lawyers have joined the protest. This protest stemmed from inadequate response and investigation, the collapse of a canopy which was newly renovated in Novi Sad on 1st of November 2024, which killed 15 people and wanted more. So basically this thing that the law does not apply equally to everyone, that those who are members of or close to the ruling majority are above the law, is the main issue. It is coupled also with endemic corruption, also related to this collapse of a canopy, state capture that we have, and general democratic backsliding embodied in lack of the free and fair elections, as well as lack of free and independent media. Opposition is vilified and marginalized. So basically, while you indeed can find some improvement when it comes to these economic indicators and in respect to some normative framework when it comes to, for example, environmental protection, the lack of these basic tenets of democracy coupled with widespread corruption, the lack of the rule of law, makes Serbia, in my mind, far behind what where it's supposed to be 10 years after negotiations started.
Now, you painted quite a bleak picture, right? But so where is then, is there a sign of progress? I mean, you spoke about backsliding. Could we say that institution-wise we're not really observing progress, but there is this progress in the mindset of people who enter the streets to claim what's supposed to be theirs, the republic?
Indeed, I would say that the people on the streets are defending the EU values more than the very EU. I mean, at this very moment. I mean, the way the EU reacted to these backsliding tendencies or autocratic rule made many people, in a way, be very critical of EU. So basically, what is going on now, I would say, in Serbia is that what's supposed to be walked as a talk we've been hearing from our government and the EU officials is walked on the streets of towns in Serbia. This democratic regaining of a public space by students and other citizens of Serbia.
All right, we'll come back to the issue how the EU actually affects a particular candidate country. But before we, so Damir, I would like to invite you. You're already a guest, as Tatjana as well, in our series of European academic forums. Speak to us a bit. How is now the situation in Bosnia? We have a lot in Slovenia about Serbia in recent weeks, also due to the unwavering support of the Ljubljana mayor to the president of Serbia. We hear a little bit less about Bosnia, sometimes in connection with our mayor again, and of course Mr. Dick. Whenever we hear speaking about Bosnia, we hear about the very complicated situation due to the federal/confederal structure and the problems that the country is experiencing on its way to Europe.
Thank you, Mate, and warm greetings to other guests and also to our audience. First of all, I would like to put a context regarding the Bosnian-Herzegovinian case and also regarding the process of the EU integration. I think in the last 2 years, we have seen a much more focused attention of the European Union towards the Bosnian. Bosnian case on Bosnia and Herzegovina as such. But nevertheless, there are some internal problems which we have, which actually enable us to be more proactive towards the EU. Some of them are structural in the sense that we are a federal state and also consensus-based state, which also means that when we adopt laws for which are in regard to the EU, that means that we have to coordinate 3 levels of government. That means the state level, 2 entities level, and cantonal level. That means 14 governments. That actually this is now a problem, and this is going to be a problem in the future regarding the implementation of EU law. I mean, this is very common to the federal state, that some competences are the state level, some competences are at the entities level, and this process of adoption and implementation of EU law, even in this process of when we actually gain the candidate status, is actually something with the internal, we have this structural internal problem. The second is this consensus-based democracy, which actually means the importance of including all 3 major segments of our society. That means the 3 constituents groups, Serbs, Croats, and Bosniaks. And then we also have the problems of so-called the others, and the problems of implementing some decisions of the European Court of Human Rights. And the third is still omnipresent influence of the Office of the High Representative, which actually is introduced after the wars in 1995, which actually has the sovereign competences, so he can adopt laws, change, like remove officials from their positions. So this is somehow the context, and then we have this process of the EU integration, which actually somehow presupposes that we are a completely sovereign state and more or less without internal problems. But still, which is also quite interesting, we have gained actually we have reached some progress. I mean, according to the, so as Professor Papić also said, when we see these reports, we have made some progress according to this reports. In the last months, we also adopted 2 laws which are also important for opening the negotiation processes, and there are 2 more laws which need to be adopted. And luckily, if we adopt these laws, we're going to hopefully open the negotiation processes. So this is like structural problems which we have still, some internal problems we have to solve, and some structure which are going to still pertain during the process of implementing laws, and still we have these problems. And then there's this very formalistic maybe progress reports, which actually they say that we have made some progress, like the most significant progress in the last 10 years, which is actually maybe true, maybe not true, because we also have this change, like this shift of paradigm when the war in Ukraine started. So this is like the context and the structural problems, and then this maybe a small conclusion that we actually, according to the reports, we have made some progress. So
okay, so we leave Bosnia here and we move to Skopje, Macedonia. We do not hear any news to the mayor of Ljubljana, but in general, to put these jokes a little bit aside, it has to be said that Slovenia looks very favorably towards enlargement to all of the 3 countries that are in discussion today, and that Slovenes in particular have had a lot of sympathy for Macedonia, despite and especially because of the very unfortunate situation where this has been blocking for many years the institutional regarding to the name. That we had the Bulgarian situation, then we had the French reservations, and Macedonia also had its own internal problems with minority issues. Dennis, how do the things currently stand? Where is the North Macedonia to be completely formally, legally correct? Where does North Macedonia stand nowadays on it to the European Union?
First of all, thank you very much for having me and for the invitation, and to be in a group of esteemed colleagues such as the today's panel. Yeah, you're right. You're absolutely right about the long story. We're somehow, as a country, veterans in this EU enlargement saga. Just, as a brief context to and a background to the whole story of North Macedonia's EU enlargement. We signed the Stabilization and Association Agreement already 2001, even before Croatia did. We received the candidate status in 2005, almost 20 years ago. We faced for a long time until basically 2019, and we signed the Prespa agreement with Greece. We faced the veto and the first-hand experience. We had the first-hand experience of what's wrong with the EU enlargement process, especially when it comes to unanimity, when it comes to bilateralization of the process of EU enlargement, first with Greece, now with Bulgaria. In 2019, basically 20, it was the French and France that blocked the enlargement process in general. We were coupled with Albania in that phase. Now, as of recently, we are in the phase of decoupling from, or already decoupling has been achieved from Albania. Now, Albania, along with Montenegro, also according to Marta Kos, who is, by the way, the EU Commissioner on enlargement from Slovenia, another proof of Slovenia's favorable stance towards EU enlargement, especially of the Western Balkan countries. As she basically stated, those two countries are front runners, and North Macedonia could fast catch up if, of course, with this condition, if we introduce and adopt another round of constitutional amendments. Now, obliged through this French proposal where we need to introduce Bulgarians in our constitution and provide them with a certain level of recognition within the constitution, which appears to be a very formal type of and technical type of requirement. However, it has become a huge political issue, domestic political issue, and the current government, once again, VMRO Dopomena is in power together with 4 Albanian political parties, have a very strong stance against this. Actually, this has caused a rift within the citizenship and among the population, whereas almost 80% of Macedonians are against the introduction and adoption of such constitutional amendments, even though somewhere around 65% are in favor of EU accession. And there is no such a resentment or a strong EU pessimistic approach or stance among the population. However, there is this problem. So there is this type of disconnect between what is required from us as constitutional amendments and what the population stance is, and what the populists in power now, a right-wing populist, have as a view. So the current state is, again, a deadlock, entrapped by this bilateralization of the enlargement process, abuse of veto powers based on identity politics, once again, and a very lenient position of the European Union towards these identity issues, especially the strong disappointment that the EU created among Macedonian citizens, especially with the promises not being met. Just to remind also our guests and students following this webinar, we usually tend to say after signing and before ratification of the Prespa agreement that this is the agreement through which we change our constitutional name from Republic of Macedonia to Republic of North Macedonia as a concession to Greece. Skopje was basically the Brussels of the Balkans. We had almost every single the highest officials, both from the EU, even from the US, visiting Skopje, sending video messages to our citizens prior to the referendum vote in our country, promising that once this deal has been done and reached and ratified, and we change our constitutional name, basically our path towards a merit-based accession into the EU is basically paved. However, soon after the referendum passed, very soon after the constitutional amendments were introduced in 2019, Somehow these promises faded away, and we are the paradigmatic case of the bigger the promises, the greater the disappointment. So there is such a type of disappointment among the population, especially in light of the latest veto by Bulgaria.
Dennis, it's what you told us is really a cause for concern, and because my second question was really supposed to be about what the EU has so far done right, wrong in this accession progress, and I'd just like to stay with you for this round, to begin with you, and really invite you to reflect on this question and you have a it, but to reflect on it on two levels: the academic perspective, how you evaluate the steps taken by the European Union, because what you seems you're referring to there are double standard, or I mean the hazard conditionality, which boils down to sovereignist pressure of particular member states, and then from the to the popular perspective, to the perspective of the people, how does this inconsistency or the lack of consistency in the EU's positions actually feed back to the to this? You know, we used to have, especially Slovenians and people coming from Central and Eastern Europe joining the European Union. There was this strong belief in the narrative of going back to Europe. Does this still rhyme with Macedonian people, or there has been a widespread disillusionment instead?
Well, interesting that you mentioned this phrase of return to Europe. You know, I wrote a piece about the idiosyncrasies of the Yugoslav socialist legal tradition and its remnants in our countries. It's very interesting that this type of discourse is not present truly, because we were never, you know, perceived to be part of Europe, different from maybe Croatia and Slovenia. You know, these more southern part of the former country never had this type of discourse, and this is maybe part of the problem as well. And taking into consideration that the European Union and the European Commission, in its approach towards introducing reforms, and many reforms have been EU induced, we have to be fair about it. You know, many good things have been done under the banner of the European Union. The European Union is the greatest supporter financially, technically, expertise-wise in our country, and many successful even reforms have been EU-driven and EU-led. Nevertheless, this does not remove the problem of double standards, of the issue of sustainability, of the issue of stabilitocracy, which now will even have a stronger emphasis on the geostrategic aspect, especially in light of what's going on in Ukraine and Moldova. And we don't know how this will unravel later, but now we are put in the same basket. So this might be perceived both as positive and negative. Positive because, you know, the EU agenda on enlargement obviously has been reinforced now. We have once again a commissioner specifically for enlargement. It's not only a legionnaire, but on the other hand, you know, when it comes to reforms, Ukraine is definitely lagging behind. You know, if it was truly a merit-based, coming back to the double standards, you have the European Stability Initiative rankings based on the progress reports of the European annual progress report by the European Commission. You can see that when it comes to fundamentals, for instance, North Macedonia has been a front runner on the same level as Montenegro, regardless of the fact that we haven't started the negotiations yet, and we'll still await the start of the official start of the negotiations. So we have a very mixed picture or mixed feelings about these aspects of EU success or lack of success, especially when it comes to sustainability of certain reforms, particularly in the sphere of rule of law. And as of lately, this interregnum, both in the European Union and the United States, is being used by the current government with very strong and visible illiberal tendencies, especially when it comes to the area of judiciary and the rule of law. So we are entering, I'm afraid that we are entering once again a new cycle of judicial capture. We already went through one cycle of judicial capture and recapture, even a state capture and recapture. Now I believe we are entering a second cycle. And again, it appears that the European Union is somehow not reacting promptly and leaving things to even to faster once that this is done. Then only to try to be the problem solver once even things get to a boiling point. So we have a very mixed picture about this. What's going on currently? It's not that favorable towards the track record of the European Union, and I'm slightly worried that things might unravel in an unwanted direction.
Thanks. Tatjana already alluded to a little bit to the missed opportunities of the European Union in general, and especially reaction to the current and ongoing protests in Serbia. And if we speak about the European Union, it's a duality of roles. On one hand side, you have rules and its institutions. On the other hand side are the institutions, are the member states, of course. So how do you evaluate from the EU points of view, from the perspective of how from the perspective of the standard the EU itself should be living up to, the way the EU far conducted this enlargement process?
Well, I mean, when I think about the role of the EU on the process of democratic reforms and economic reforms in Serbia, the picture seems similar to the one Danny just depicted when it comes to the North Macedonia. What I remember at the beginning of the accession process, after the political majority who has beaten Milosevic announced EU accession as a major foreign policy goal, the role of the EU was very important and very positive, in a way that these accession criteria have set a clear agenda for the political majority to follow, like a to-do list. They could never draft on their own back in the days, like 20 years ago. So undoubtedly, many good things have happened from these clearly set criteria. However, over time and due to different issues, some of them internal to the EU, some of them external, some of the geopolitical changes, some of the local challenges, such as declaration of independence of Kosovo, the EU role has started to change in a way that both academic community and general public seem to see that the EU prefers stability of the region over its own values embodied in these accession criteria, which were very much useful at the beginning of the accession process. So, namely the support of those in power who are sought to secure stability despite their autocratic tendencies. So basically, what is seen is that the result of such support is sacrificing EU values in the region, and this did not go unnoticed, you know, in the general population. For example, if you look at the opinion poll, as of 2020, 21, 22, you could see that a negative views on the EU membership of Serbia prevailed in Serbia. For example, the poll from the April 2022 found 44% of participants against Serbia joining the EU, and only 35% were in favor. So now when you compare these numbers to the numbers from 2009, you see a 20% drop for the joining the EU. So in 2009, you had 55% of citizens supporting the joining the EU, and only 34 were against. So this clear shift is also evident paradoxically in the circles of people who are pro-EU, who are liberal, who are pro-Western, who supported the accession to the EU from the very beginning. And the reason for that you see lack of the support in these circles is similar to the reasons already mentioned in relation to Macedonia: double standards, hypocrisy, the fact that people perceive, both experts and general public, that the EU is not just ready to tolerate, but to support autocratic leader of a candidate country for the sake of its own interests, such as buying needed weapons and ammunition for Ukraine, or lithium for electric vehicles. So basically, what I already said at our first round is that it seems that those students and citizens on the streets are supporting the values of the EU more than the very EU. And paradoxically, more and more of the people become Eurosceptics. For example, you could, I mean, even if on the, like surface, if you would look at the photographs of the protests, you would not see EU flag. But protests in Georgia, for example, are flooded with blue with yellow stars. So there is this clear step back, which is, I would say, a result of how EU was handling situation in Serbia in the last 10 years, at least.
Thank you, Tatjana. How would you say that the situation in Bosnia is similar? Because for many reasons, endogenous and exogenous, the EU side, also on Bosnian side, Bosnia has been, in terms of the accession process, long left in a limbo, as it were. And recently, the EU has had this change of mind to some extent under duress, as it were. So, among the Bosnian population, different parts of Bosnia, what is the view of the European Union? Here, I invite you to reflect similarly as your predecessor did. And from your own academic perspective, what have been the least opportunities on behalf of the European in this succession process?
I think we have similar processes, both in similar as to North Macedonia and Serbia. And I think we had also this shift from the EU side. Whereas, I mean, also remember, I think that was similar to Northern Macedonia. When we were actually fulfilling the requests within the stabilization and accession processes, when we actually filled more of the requirements than, for example, at that time Croatia, and then European Union actually stopped with these processes. I mean, even though there was quite a willingness also to move towards this. Actually, also European Union supported actually failed constitutional reform in 2006, which would have actually made our institution actually reform this. Would have reformed institutions in Bosnia, and some human rights instruments actually implemented, and also decision-making processes made more relaxed. But actually, that process actually failed. And then actually, when it failed internally, and also it failed externally in the sense of the European Union. And then we started this process, this time of stagnation, like nothing was happening until the 2018, I would say. So no matter if we will fulfill or not fulfill requirements that will be coming from the EU side. I mean, I would also, somehow emphasize this positive things which EU actually has achieved academically, also with the different programs, economically supporting different infrastructure projects, also within the rule of law. So, I mean, if you want to generalize, I think the role of the EU reforming the country has been positive. Secondly, the citizens, I think they still they see the EU as something idealistically, which is also maybe good, because then I think these people in Bosnia, they need some kind of positive news. So this kind of positive picture of the EU is something which moves us. When it comes to the politicians, I think they're declaratory pro-EU, but their behavior depends from those who are factually pro-EU and those who are actually against EU. So this is like maybe different layers of how the EU has been perceived here. But when it comes to EU, I think what comes through my mind is somehow that like these positive things they would be implemented from the EU side as long as you don't enter. So like we will support you economically through funds or grants or good like loans, very affordable loans. But if you want to be members of our club, then there's going to be some obstacles. So like this hypocrisy or like double standards. I think one standard is as soon as you don't like, we're going to help you in your internal development in some sense. Also, when they condition money, usually is for the good cause, more or less. And the second is, but please don't enter the EU. So I would say that this is somehow a general picture. I mean, actually, if I want to generalize, this is like I would generalize it in this sense. So like entering, so we are not so sure, even though you have fulfilled the requirements.
Thanks. Well, so now we've done 2 rounds discussing a little bit the situation on the ground, examining the academic and general popular attitudes towards Europe, and how the European Union has around doing the enlargement business. We've heard not so successfully, but of course the EU itself has been immensely weakened over the last decade for a variety of reasons. Some have spoken about the perma crisis, with health emergency, economic crisis, migration, humanitarian crisis, and now it seems that we are also at the verge of major geopolitical shift. The cards are, they are in a way they are on the table, but they have been reshuffled around. And of course, the Balkans in particular has been in the epicenter of the great powers' attention. And my question for you would be here now for the third round. Who are the major actors now, the geopolitical actors in the Balkans? It's clear that the EU is trying to come back because to a certain extent it's been pushed out, that is my estimate, by Russia, by its historical ties especially, and also cultural church ties to Serbia. Then I think China has made important economic inroads into the Western Balkans, even though some are claiming that their interest is chiefly economic and not really political. And maybe the US under the President Trump, who knows, will play a different role now. During the last Trump administration, there were rumors that Trump is willing to withdraw borders in the Western Balkans. He's planning to conduct this transactional international diplomatic politics with Ukraine. God knows whether he has like that in the pocket also for the Western Balkans. So what's your, not I would say opinion of this, but even more feeling on this? What might happen, especially if the EU sticks to its double standard, especially if the EU wants to keep you in a way semi-permanently in this waiting room? What follows in this part of the world in the next couple of years, maybe 5? Dennis, maybe I start with you.
Sure, yeah. I mean, it's a multi-layered type of answer that I'm supposed to provide here, because the lack of EU enlargement perspective on the EU side, because I believe the greatest problem is this perspective, and they're struggling now to reconvince us, or once again, that we have that type of accession perspective ahead, which is not quite clear, neither domestically nor in the EU for the time being. Who will fill in the gap? We can already see by the change of government since the summer last year, that is, that this type of illiberal tendencies that we can see, especially coming with through the strong ties of our government with Orban and Hungary, the great financial support that came of almost $1 billion euros from the Hungarian bank, which most probably are Chinese funds. So this type of corrosive capitalism or corrosive capital that you mentioned, the economic interest of China is entering, but politically, it's this illiberal tendencies. Also, this arches going all the way from Russia through the Balkans, especially these parts, Serbia, Macedonia, and then also going to Turkey. So this is the arch, basically, of who will be more or less fill in the gap. The ties that you mentioned related to Serbia with Russia are not as strong as Macedonia. It is also the Serb influence in Macedonian propaganda that somehow pushes this tie. But historically, we have, as a country, we have suffered far more from Russia than anyone else in the Balkans, because they were supporting, Serbia and Bulgaria throughout the history, especially revolving around the issue of Macedonia. So Macedonia was a bargaining chip between these two powers, and usually we suffered the most. So there is this cautious attitude towards Russia. Nevertheless, there is also an internal matter that needs to be taken into consideration, and that's once again fragile ethnic issues. Because this unfulfilled promises of the EU has resulted in somehow a cleavage also in orientation towards EU membership, especially now with Albania further progressing in the EU membership, in the EU enlargement process and accession process, will create an internal interethnic pressure, because this cleavage could be observed also through the public surveys and stances towards the European Union, because the 1/4 of the population, especially our ethnic Albanians, they perceive this issue to be that are matter of vetoes, first initially by Greece and then Bulgaria, to be directly related to the identity of the majority population, that's ethnic Macedonians. So once this starts unraveling, it might be problematic, and we can see early signs of this. So I believe the EU should be really cautious, even if it has EU enlargement as a bureaucratic stabilizing tool, it needs to be very cautious that it might open a problem that we were somehow champions in closing, especially since 2001 and the Ohrid Framework Agreement, that we were supposed to be a poster child when it comes to interethnic relations and how they're arranged or regulated. So one of the negative effects of unfulfilled promises and EU's negligence towards the Western Balkans, without projecting clear perspectives, is also this type of internal issues, and this will be reflected, and this will be part of this larger dilemmas of reshuffling borders, redrawing borders, maybe, because it might have, it might result also as negative effect of the resolution of the Kosovo issue, or maybe even in Bosnia, if that occurs along these transactional lines and transactional politics.
Yes, Tatjana, what are your views on this? Because if we enter into these transactional policies, redrawing borders, we might open up again the proverbial Pandora.
Exactly. I mean, you remember back in the days, it was, I think, 2018, where this border adjustment was pitched, and it was informally agreed by or supported by Americans, but then stopped by Germans and the EU, having Trump in play, or having an American president who seems even more erratic than we could have imagined during the election campaign, might be something worth thinking about. When it comes to influences of Russia and China, I have to say at the beginning that Serbia was, after the democratic changes of 2000s, actively pursuing this multi-vector foreign policy, relying on China, on Russia, on EU, on the US. It tried to have it all. Of course, at some points, you cannot have it all, but somehow, for example, Serbia managed not to introduce sanctions to Russia, but at the same time managed to be a candy darling of the West due to these arms sales to Ukraine. So it seems that what we thought that you cannot have your cake and eat it too, for the ruling majority in Serbia, does not work. So in my mind, what one could expect is something more coming from the US in relation to Kosovo thing. Let me remind you on the Washington agreement that was signed at the end of Trump's term back in 2020 on normalization or economic agreement that basically was one of his election campaign stunts, but he managed to pitch himself as someone who can fix all the things, from very irresponsible statements on Gaza to, you can imagine what he can try to do here in the Balkans, which is very complicated ground for these kind of plays.
This doesn't sound very optimistic, not at all, but the question of optimism or pessimism will be the very last one that will finish this debate. Before doing so, we'll go to Damir. Similar question, actually exactly the same, just adding to it, because we often hear here in Slovenia that other than aforementioned geostrategic powers, political powers, in Bosnia, there are also Arabic countries and Turkey have invested a lot into Bosnia after the gruesome atrocities of the war that we witnessed in this. So how would you evaluate this geopolitical situation in Bosnia in the hands of these superpowers?
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I'll go back again to our context, where we have two ethnic groups, Bosnians, Croats, and Serbs, and there are somehow good examples where you can influence externally, and whereas Serbian political elites have been heavily influenced by the politics of Serbia, no matter whether there was Vučić or any other political party. Croatians influenced by the Croatian, especially, and Bosnians usually, I wouldn't say influenced by the Turkey, but somehow trying to make ties with Erdogan in the times when Bakir Izetbegović was member of the parliament, was member of the presidency. So you asked me like whether the Islamic countries, we had this influence after the war, just after the war, when the main influence was trying to change the nature of Islam in Bosnia. You probably know that there's different teachings in Saudi Arabia where you have Salafis, and here is more is a Sunni with a different Halafiski fiqh, which is different way of teaching. But somehow Islam community has managed to remove this influence, so we don't have this kind of influence of Saudi Arabia here. We have very small Salafi community that's not even in percentage wise, but mainly when it comes to the Muslims or Bosniaks here, they have remained their own teachings, which has been over the 400 or 500 years. Politically, I would say there has been major influence of Russia, especially in 2000, somewhere 2010, 2014, influencing and the other entity, that's Republika Srpska, when we had the news of major investments, especially in the oil industry, which actually have never made a successful in sense of profiting of it, and also a shift in politics, meaning that political elites in Republika Srpska, like especially SNSD and Milorad Dodik, have shifted from the EU towards the Russia. So you could see this influence coming already like 10 years ago, and I think it's still present, especially probably relating also to Serbian influence and Russia, Serbia, and then influencing in Republika Srpska, probably also related to issues of Kosovo. They're using this part of Bosnia in order to somehow positions there. So geopolitically, I would say also Serbia, but also Russia. So like there's always this chance of destabilizing, or at least fixating Bosnia in some kind of limbo, so to say, because I mean every decision, in order to be delivered or made, you have to have consensus of all three parts. I mean, I didn't see this influence within the Bosnian elites, less in the Croatians, but there's this Russian influence. Also there, I think there was one also part of the question that China was mostly, and is, I think, generally interested in economics, in the economical part. There have been some investments in building the highways, but in a very secretive way, very corruptive way, in meaning that you can't see the contracts. They were like covered with this secrecy paradigm, or very in concessions which are not very convenient also for the entity. We have some failed investments in the coal industry, which actually never fulfilled. But I think the prevailing, if you say that there is some kind of influence, there is a prevailing influence of one hand of Russia and Serbia, and second, there is a prevailing influence on Croatia to position Croatian ethnic group better within the constitutional system of Bosnia, using its position as a member of the EU.
Thank you, Damir, and thank you to all three of you for painting this very interesting picture. It's clear that in this small part of Europe, there are so many different interests. The countries themselves are diverse already internally, and then there are also interests coming from which makes this picture at present already complicated. Not to mention the historical roots that are still having their impact nowadays. But since slowly running out of time, we've had two questions from the audience, and I will add my little bit of it to these two questions. So you will have an opportunity now to respond to these questions in one. And my invitation to you would be in the following way. So do you think, given that what you've said and what you know, and in the epistemic communities in which you live, the air, the national air that you breathe in your country, is it possible to end on a positive or note, or is it necessary to succumb down negative conclusion in terms of future of this part of Europe, in particular taking into account the actual capacity of the Union, and this is the question from the audience, to deliver the enlargement, because the EU itself, it's extremely marred by its internal problems. So in your opinion, is it the EU actually capable of delivering enlargement in its 27 composition, provided that unanimity has to be found? And Denis has already alluded to that. Will the Commissioner for Enlargement actually make any difference? So the capacity of the EU, the new added value of the EU commissioner, and can we, on that basis, having in mind the situation in your countries, and on a positive, negative, relatively, let's say, sober conclusion about the future. Let's start with Tatjana, and then Denis, and then Damir. This is how I see you in my screen. Tatjana, I can't hear you.
I had trouble unmuting myself, so hence the stance. So let me put it this way. I'm much more optimistic that I have been in a while, maybe in the last 2 decades. This might be due to being in a certain age, but it is not due to the newly appointed EU Commissioner on enlargement. The reason is quite unexpected, and it of course pertains to the students protesting in Serbia. These are the people who belong to famous generation Z. You know, they launched these protests. They're demanding the rule of law, and this was a generation that was, at least in my experience, always seeking, you know, some sort of work-life balance, a generation more interested in their personal well-being than big ideas. Well, fortunately, we got this wrong. The way they led these protests, promoted solidarity, walked the talk, finding the smallest common denominator in a very diverse group of people to ask for a system change. It is really, I mean, I salute them and I admire that very, very much. But at the same time, we all know that changes cannot happen outside organized political process, right? Meaning political parties. And now, since students seem not to trust political parties, now it remains to be seen how this tremendous energy we see in the streets, different towns in Serbia, will translate in this political arena. I mean, it remains to be seen. Obviously, this time it seems that one requires some sort of a new approaches to the way this can be formalized. I don't expect them to come from the EU or any other great power. What I can say at the very end is that, in my opinion, Serbia is not the same anymore after these protests. These young people are not the same. You, Matej, hinted at the beginning that they are like practicing democracy. They politically woken up. And this is the generation we thought is like oblivious of the political things around them. So these protests, which are massive, which are all over Serbia, not only in Belgrade, they united many people in asking to live in an orderly society. But state is still captured, but it seems that society is in a way liberated. And it is really a great achievement for Serbia, and for it's like a daily exercise of democracy, which is deadly for any authoritarian rule. And for this reason, I can say I am an optimist.
Tatjana, these are really good reasons for being an optimist, and I share these reasons with you. Denis, the floor is.
Yeah. I just wanted to follow up on Tatjana's point about students and the optimism raised by the students. I'm closely following also what's going on in Serbia, because it reminds me of maybe a forgotten episode in our history as well. We had the plenum, the student plenum and the professor plenum also in Skopje. very large protests lasting for months that then developed and transformed into the colorful revolution of 2016 and the change of government that followed in 2017. Of course, injected a huge dose of enthusiasm that was then wasted. And then we ended up being very disappointed and resulting in the current apathy that we have in our country. I hope this will not be the case in Serbia, even though I'm slightly skeptical that this type of protest will lead to a political process that will be finalized through a government change. So on this note, I'm also cautiously skeptical about EU's plan. I believe there are many question marks still hanging around about what the EU and the European Commission plans to do about this problem of the unanimity at every single stage of the enlargement process of the negotiations, whether it will try to tackle the bilateralization of and this type of bilateral capture of the process of enlargement or not. So far, I haven't seen clear marks. I hope there is something going on behind the curtain, so to say, that they're working on these proposals stemming from the French-German paper that basically summed up some of the proposals addressed by several think tanks working in the region and related to the region. So far, we haven't seen that much. And of course, the big question mark is Ukraine. How this conflict, whether it will be resolved soon, how it will be resolved. When it comes to territorial integrity, when it comes to sovereignty, and the whole approach of the EU towards Ukraine, because compared to Ukraine, the whole Western Balkans it's peanuts even. Especially if we take the front runners now, Montenegro and Albania. I mean, they could be useful cases to show and to demonstrate and to manifest the true devotion of the European Union towards enlargement. But still, in the case of Montenegro, we see Croatia taking over this bilateralization. We'll see how things will go. Albania just started negotiations, so it's too early to say and to be enthusiastic about what Marta Kos, the European Commissioner on Enlargement, mentioned 3 days ago, during the Munich Security Conference, that they will be able to finish negotiations by the end of their term. And we have just a year and a half ago, Charles Michel mentioned that 2030 is the date when the Western Balkan countries will join the European Union, and etc. So we heard a lot of forecasts like this. However, we haven't seen enough action on the ground. So that's why allow me to be slightly skeptical about this.
You're absolutely allowed to be slightly skeptical, and I think you also stated very good reasons for that skepticism. Amir, now it's your turn.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, when it comes to our case, since we I mean, deservedly or not, gained this candidate state, there has been some kind of positive movement within among the political elites. And you have to be aware that there are almost more than six political parties within the state government. That means a lot of negotiation, a lot of compromises, and this ability to make a compromise for the EU is something which is also important for us internally. So practicing something which EU demands is good for our democracy. No matter if we make some concessions, that's something which is needed. And this ability that we agree on something which is, I mean, the EU is I think value on which all political elites actually agree, and all three major ethnic groups. So without it, I don't know what would be our or sadly a common denominator also in Bosnia. So it also depends on the EU, how the EU is going to approach to these processes. So this is a dance of two. So if I think if EU doesn't deliver something, at least something, there's going to be also lack of interest in involving these kind of processes. Secondly, I think I'm positive in the sense that as long as there's EU presence in some kind of sense, and its presence is mostly positive, that our society is also going to change. So this is also important, and that this EU actually supports something which is basically good: the rule of law, economic growth, academic transfers, and as long as these kind of sentiments are here and people are going to use, and they're going to build somehow this also European community within our country. And secondly, why I'm also optimistic, as Tatjana also said, so whatever happens in Serbia also reflects in Bosnia. So every positive change is going to also reflect to our country, at least somehow so Serbia has always been interested to interfere into our relations, especially using the Republika Srpska for different causes. So every political change in a positive sense is also going to reflect positively in our countries, no matter if we enter EU or not. So if the EU is present here to support this kind of process, so this is also good. And all I see that, I mean, the main I think our main goal shouldn't be entering the EU. It should be actually fundamentally changing our societies or building the structures also to be able to maintain democratic regimes, or in good times and also especially in the bad times, if you see, for example, in what's happening in the States. So we should be able to sustain these democratic capacities. So I mean, there is still positive and optimistic sense among the political elites and citizens, more when we actually gain the candidate status. And so like, I mean, we have this right. This is very symbolic that we have the right to also expose EU flag, and when people see EU flag in front of the institutions, they feel positive, like something is happening, you know. So to conclude, so internally, like if Serbia succeeds with these changes, it's going to be also positive for us. And jointly, I mean, with Serbia and also Northern Macedonia and other countries, we can, and with support of the EU, the change could happen also, I think.
Thank you very much, Damir, also for your own words. I'd like to thank now all the three professors, Professors Papić, Banović, and Prešova for being with us. Dear Tatjana, dear Denis, dear Damir, I really appreciated that we had a chance to talk to you, to learn firsthand from your, not just from knowledge and expertise, but also from your experience from the countries where you come from. And I think, I mean, this even when the times are not really the easiest, even when there's a lot on the potentially negative on the horizon, there's nothing else than working hard towards the ideals that Damir mentioned, and the ideals themselves and in of themselves that actually count. And of course, we also hope that this kind of the bilateralization that Denis mentioned, this kind of conditionality on the basis of the good neighborly relations will give way to long-term thinking in the European Union, being aware of the contingency situation in which Europe has found itself nowadays. So once more, thank you very much for being our guests. I hope we will see each other also in the in real life, as it were, in person, not just virtually like and for our audience, I also like to thank them for posing the questions. And I can announce at this stage that 2 additional European forums are already in the pipeline. They will be following them in a couple of next weeks. The first one will be examining the new economic reality, the competition or the lack of competitiveness of the European Union against the United States. Whereas the second one will look a little bit more at a different question and on the role of women in science, which is all the important purpose of pluralism in our societies and in Europe at large. Once more, thank you very much for being with us, and I hope to see you all soon in the near future. Bye bye.